So, hello and welcome back yet again to Christine trying to sum up chapters of a wonderful book. It is time to jump yet again into the Phoenix Transformed, where in the last chapter it really kind of just seemed like that was it. The bad guys win. But obviously not, since we still have 3/4 of the book to go. I hope everybody is doing good. It warmed back up again. I'm not complaining. It seems a little odd, but hey, I will take it. And it didn't warm up into like yuck territory. It was, I don't know, like in the low 60s today. It was beautiful. I went out for a walk. I found a really cool mushroom. And now I'm like, it's like dark and comfortable outside. I mean, not comfortable enough to be running around in a tank top or anything, but it's really nice. I wanted to have a campfire tonight. I've been really wanting to have like a campfire and sit and toast marshmallows because I've got a fire ring and I've got all that firewood that I cut up, and it's just been dry and just windy enough that I'm like, I don't feel safe and comfortable having a fire, even with a hose nearby to like chase down sparks. I just don't feel comfortable. If it hadn't been windy, I probably would have had a campfire, but maybe not with the wind, because I don't want to start a forest fire. I would feel like the worst person in the face of like the universe if something like that happened. So instead, we are going to sit here and I am going to do my best to recap chapter 5 of uh of The Phoenix Transformed by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory, and chapter 5 is titled The Stronghold of Illusion, which, as we begin chapter 5, we begin with Harrier and Tercel being escorted to Bisochim by what could be termed at least partially angry mob. And the boys aren't exactly sure what is going on. They're trying really hard to feel like not like prisoners, but that's really hard with Xanatar, who is the one who led the Isvani army against all of the Atreyu cities, shouting that they're demons, and everybody else shouting, that Bisochim will know what to do. Thankfully, Liafa, Shariah's grandmother, is at least keeping some sort of order. And with all of that, they are being escorted to Bisochim. And Tercel does stop and think to himself, it was hard for him to tell whether things were going right or horribly wrong just now. Right, he guessed, if they were going to get to see Bisochim, but not all that right if they were going to be escorted there by a mob of Isvani who thought that they were demons, and maybe really wrong if Harrier lost his temper and tried to kill Xanatar. Tercel thought that they had bigger things to worry about right now, though. Should their dragon seek to aid them, then surely his dragon will secure him in turn. Tercel wasn't sure if Harrier had heard Liafa's words and was just ignoring them, or if he had missed them because he was obsessing on Xanatar. But if Bisochim was bonded to a dragon, and that brings up a lot of caution and fear for Tercel, because he knows that if Bisochim is bonded to a dragon, not only is he going to be a super strong mage with the power of a dragon to draw on, But their idea of just killing Bisochim would also be killing a dragon. And Tercel isn't sure that that is something he can bring himself to do, especially so soon after Ankildar has gone missing. He does try to bring this up with Harrier, and Harrier is being very Harrier. And he's like, I know, I heard the Leofa say that he has a dragon. We'll just have to deal with that. And Harrier has this grand idea that, you know, it'll all work out. Tercel also thinks it'll all work out, but what he thinks is that maybe he can talk some sense into Bisochim. I feel like Tercel always thinks the best of people, and just get Bisochim to hop on his dragon and fly to the Elven lands and go get some Elven mages to help them. Harrier thinks this is a stupid idea, but that they'll be able to propose it to this Bisochim fellow as soon as they get to see him, which should be in about a chime. And this is where I think finally, after 5 books, at least we finally get a little bit more of an explanation of time factors in this. Because the very first sentence of the next paragraph is, it actually took them a bit more than 2 chimes, or half an hour, to make their way through all the tents. So now we know a chime is 15 minutes for sure. It's a little thing, but it's one of those things that I feel better knowing, because, it was hard enough for me trying to figure out a send day and a fortnight. At least a fortnight is something I had heard of before, but the whole bells and chimes thing was messing with my head. But in the span of about 30 minutes or 2 chimes, they finally arrive and see Bisochim. Now, the entire way that they are going there, being escorted by the Isvani, Shariah, Xanatar, Sinarin, and Leofa, and Leofa's grandson, her heir, are all arguing behind Harrier and Tercel, who are doing their best to kind of ignore them. Harrier is trying to stay calm. Tercel is just trying to figure out what they're going to do now that he knows that there's another dragon involved. And in the midst of all this confusion, they finally arrive. And they get their first look at Bisochim. A man got to his feet. He had been sitting in the midst of the wreckage, and sitting so still that Tercel hadn't seen him until he moved. He walked slowly towards them. This had to be Bisochim. Tercel wasn't sure what he had expected Bisochim to look like. It was difficult to tell his age. He was older than Xanatar, Tercel guessed, but younger than Leofa. Bisochim looked like any other Isvani. And even though everyone, even Shariah, had called him a wild mage, he wasn't wearing blue robes. His vest was gray with a darker stripe, his overtunic had probably started off as white, and his sash was missing, but he looked ordinary. And Xanatar immediately pushes forward and introduces Tercel and Harrier as the demons that I told you about, Bisochim. And that starts up the argument again. Shariah begins arguing that they are not demons, that the Nalzindar would not harbor demons, and that Bisochim is obviously the demon-tainted one. Leofa, being the oldest one there, tries to calm everybody down. Bisochim is just standing there, not doing anything as this argument rages, until finally Bisochim looks around and speaks up and says, no, they're not demons, and I want to talk to them alone. Which makes the Isvani start arguing again. Bisochim is very insistent, and finally, after a lot of grumbling, finally, Harrier, Tercel, Shariah, Sinarin, and Bisochim are all standing together because Shariah and Sinarin refuse to leave because I think they're afraid that Bisochim is going to somehow kill Harrier and Tercel. But now we're face to face. And Harrier opens up his mouth and probably says the wrong thing, but then again, is there a right thing to say in this situation? Harrier says, "We really did come here to kill you, you know," Harrier said. He didn't sound angry, he just sounded really irritated. "Hare," Tercel said. "He tried to kill us," Harrier said defensively. "I deserve death," Bisochim told them. "We're too late," Tercel said. He had known it out in the storm, but he hadn't wanted to admit it to himself or to the others. They'd all just keep going because of Harrier's mage price, because there was nothing else they could do, because the fact that they had failed was too big to think about. Harrier looked at Tercel, looking as irritated as a wet cat. "Isn't he supposed to be tainted? He's not tainted." "How can the Shadowed One not be tainted?" said Shariah, approaching them warily. "He who has led the tribes into madness, who has twisted their minds with the wild magic, who has led them to slaughter the people of the Atreyu cities." "He's not," Harrier snapped, "and unfortunately I'd be one to know." Shariah offers to kill Bisochim anyway. Obviously, since she thinks Harrier can't do it, she'll just do it. And Tercel grabs for Shariah to keep her from, jumping forward and killing Bisochim. And Tercel jumps in between all of this and asks why to Bisochim. He just wants to know why. And Bisochim just stares, and Harrier laughs. And he's like, he's just going to lie to us, Tercel. I don't know why you want to talk to him. I don't know what you think he's going to help. And Tercel says that he wants to know why Bisochim did what he did and what his reasoning was so that maybe they can fix it. And then Bisochim speaks. "I put darkness into flesh for love." Bisochim said this in a low voice. Out of the corner of his eye, Tercel saw Shariah stop moving. She and Sinarin stood as if they had been spellbound, and they didn't move again. If either Shariah or Harrier had moved or spoken, Tercel thought that Bisochim might have stopped talking, but he could almost feel the stillness on either side of him. He didn't dare look away from the man sitting at his feet. "Tell me what you did," Tercel said quietly. Afternoon became twilight as Bisochim spoke, his voice barely louder than a whisper. He spoke of Saravase, his bonded, of the shortness of her years once they had been linked to his, of his conviction from the moment he had taken up his 3 books that there was some riddle the wild magic meant for him to unfold. He spoke of withdrawing from the world, coming to this ancient place of power, setting his feet upon the path that led to his conviction of an imbalance in the wild magic. He spoke of years of careful exploration that had led him to the conclusion that the darkness must be reborn, of his careful plans and his safeguards to ensure that the tiny spark of darkness he summoned into the world would be harmlessly entombed, he spoke of having those plans spiral farther and farther out of control. "They used you and they lied to you," said Tercel quietly. "Yes," said Bisochem simply. "I have set Aniron free to do as she will. I have saved no one. I have gained nothing." "And we've lost," said Harrier, speaking for the first time, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "No," Tercel answered. For the first time since he had lost Ankeldar, a wound that would never heal, Tercel felt the tiniest spark of hope. He didn't know what would work, but for the first time in Sen nights, he could think of things to do. "I don't think... Not yet. All right, yes, this doesn't match my vision. My vision was warning me not to let the woman in the lake of fire get what it was that she wanted, and I guess she's already gotten that. But there's only one of her, and Individual and Darkened have a lot of power, but they can be trapped, just the way Bisochem was planning on trapping her in the first place." This leads to more arguing, but it's mostly arguing that Bisochem says that he can't trap her. He tried to trap her, and Tercel brings up the elves again. And Harrier actually agrees with this plan, and he says, "Oh, you're right. Bisochem can take his dragon, and he can get through Palasha's Veil, which stops anybody who is not an elf, a wild mage, or a dragon from getting into the Elven lands. And he can go tell the Elven Queen that we need a whole bunch of mages because we've got a rogue demon on the loose, and this'll fix everything." And Bisochem tells them, no, he's not planning on ever summoning Ceravase again. He can't face her. This is kind of understandable. I don't think there's a lot of love between them right now. Bisochem says, "No, I'm not ever summoning her. I don't want to see her, not because he's mad at her, but because he's humiliated and embarrassed." Tercel tries to grab him, and Bisochem is just not there. Tercel he knows that this has to be some sort of an illusion spell, but without Ankeldar, he can't pierce it. He can't find Bisochem. Harrier does a seeking spell and tries to find Bisochem, and he can't even find him with the wild magic. Unfortunately, his mage price is also... He has to go off by himself and dig a hole in the sand with, like, a spoon, but that's the wild magic for you. And so they sit and they talk a little bit. They're trying to figure out what to do. The plan to send Bisochem and Ceravase is really the only thing that they can think of. Without Ankeldar, Tercel can't get back through the veil. Without Ankeldar, probably neither of them could even get back to the Elven lands in at least the next year or so. And having a demon loose in the desert is sort of a now problem. Harrier and Tercel kind of continue the argument that they were having before all of this started. And Harrier... Well, actually, Tercel tells Harrier that he knows that he's lying to him about something. I think tempers are just very, very short for this, for both of them at this point. And I can't blame either of them. I don't know that I would be holding any sort of composure with everything that's been going on. Tercel accuses Harrier of lying. He's like, you didn't even summon Kerta. And Harrier is extremely upset about that. And Harrier still does not tell Tercel what his mage price was, but he does tell Tercel that the mage price involved a choice, and one of the choices was for him to leave with Kerta right then, and he picked the other choice, but he doesn't tell him what it was. After that, they look around for Bisochim a little bit more. They can't exactly find him, so they start scavenging through the wreckage after the storm to at least figure out some sort of shelter, because it's coming on nighttime now, and the desert gets very, very cold at night, despite the fact that it's boiling hot during the day. They scavenge for a little while, and they find some clothing. Shariah is not quite comfortable with the clothing that they've found, because they were all dyed and patterned, and the Nalzindar never wear patterns or dyed things. They think it's too gaudy, but at least they could be warmly dressed. Shariah also finds something that she wants Harrier to put on, and he doesn't, and Tercel gets to observe their, I was going to say argument, but it really isn't an argument. You should dress yourself suitably, Shariah had said when they had first opened up the chest of clothing. She had held out a tunic and a robe to Harrier. Though the hue was difficult to tell by the cerulean light of cold fire, it was obvious that both of the garments were bright deep blue. The tunic might be a little short on Harrier, but they would both fit him, and Harrier objects. You want me to dress as a wild mage? Said Harrier, recoiling slightly. Shariah, with all due respect, I don't think that's a really good idea. The people respect the blue robes, Sinarin had said, as if pointing out that water was wet or fire was hot. Harrier laughed. Yeah, unfortunately, they think I'm a demon, so it probably really won't matter. But, despite all that, he puts on the blue robes, which makes Shariah and Sinarin much happier. The rest of the night is them just trying to figure out what to do. And Harrier points out that what they need to do is somehow get Tercel to the Veiled Lands to talk to the Elven Queen and get them here, because, as Harrier also points out, after that they're going to need to get back to Arameth to explain what's been going on down here to the Chief Magistrate, because even if no one else has thought about it, there were survivors from Tarnatha Atreyu, and they probably are going to be heading for Arameth, which means that on top of a demon running around, there's probably going to be the militia or the army headed their way from Arameth, and it's just going to be even a bigger mess. And that's kind of where we leave them, hoping that they are able to figure out a way to get Tercel to the elves so that maybe we can stop this all. And after that, the chapter transitions over, and we get, I think this is our first real look into Aniran's mind. So we shift over to, she's not quite as sophisticated as Queen Sevilla was in the Obsidian trilogy, but we get a little peek into her mind, and she's reveling. This was freedom. This was the world of form, the world of things, the world that she and her progeny would make into their nest and spawning ground, growing in power and grace until she and they could open a gateway to allow the hungry shadows that were her brethren to spill through at last and claim it as their dominion and to slake their appetites. Always, eternally, the shadow hungered. But in this moment, Aneirin was free. Free to feed herself upon blood and pain and death until she forgot even the memory of hunger. She's been experimenting. She has been making, in the book it's called Ashtaban, which I think just means spell twisted, but she has been twisting natural creatures and making them her own. She started off with a shotar and twisting it and making it into one that could stand her presence and that she could just do with what she wanted. And she's been having quite a good time doing that and just sort of reveling in it. But she's also angry and thinking about how she needs to create progeny. She needs to have offspring so that her kind can rule the world. But she was not he who is. To create such a magnificent work with a wave of her hand, she must have the magic of the world of form itself to bind her children to it. The reward of becoming her slave and consort should have gone to he who had called her, the wild mage who had set her free. Long and long, she and her brethren had whispered to him through the flames before she was even she, before she was Aneirin, corrupting all that he held dear and twisting his loyalties. When she had stood before him at last in the beautiful tomb of flesh that he had fashioned for her, he should have fallen down before her and worshipped her and become her creature plaything, become hers to do as she chose. And he had not. He had dared to command her, and in her fury she had punished him for his insolence. Yet in the end, both hunger and caution had led Aneirin to flee instead of fight. He who had called her drew his power from a bond with one of the dragon kind, and Aneirin did not fear them. But she had known, even as she stood upon the sands before the lake of fire, that if she cast a single spell to slay he who had called her, all of his people in the instant of his death and all of his dragon's power would be his for the casting of one final spell. And such a final spell might be sufficient to unmake her flesh form and then set her wandering the world of form as a disembodied, eternally ravenous spirit. No, she would seek elsewhere, reluctantly, for a consort prince. She is trying to breed a new race of Indarkend, basically, and she really thought that Bisochim was going to fall in willingly with her plan. She thinks that she'll be able to find another mage, probably not as good, and while she is contemplating all of this, the Fire Crown, who we know is actually the real Fire Crown, the great power, like a god to the fire sprite people who no longer exist, comes to Aneirin and they talk a little bit. Fire Crown, Aneirin said, have you come to pledge to me your fealty? She did not fear the Fire Crown. It had already served as her ally once. Instead, she cast about for some new being that she could entrap and make Ashtaban, for it occurred to her now she had released the Shotar too quickly for her purposes. Well, she was Sensing the fire crown coming to her, she released her very first Ashtaban Shotar, and it died. Not yet, Aniran, the fire crown told her. I have come to speak. The time for speech is past, Aniran answered. You, who were cast down and forgotten, at least you were worshipped once. Your hunger to receive that again is nothing compared to mine to receive it for the first time, but I can be generous and merciful. Help me now, and I promise you shrines and worshippers once more. The fire crown kind of looks at her, and you definitely get the feeling that he's not on her side. He's not on her side, but he's not on her side. He's definitely not on Tercell's side. He doesn't seem to be on Bisochim's side. He seems to be on a side all his own. And he tells Aniran, it is simple enough to promise that which is not yet one's to gift. It will be, said Aniran. The time-bound were oblivious to the reality and truth of the realm through which they moved, and their ignorance would lead to their destruction. So you believe, the fire crown told her. You believe it will be a simple matter to discover a mage who will give you that which you must have, blood and power tied to this world, from which you may breed a race which will make your throne. She tells him, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. The power of darkness was broken long ago. They don't even believe in demons now, so it will be easy enough for me to find a mage. The fire crown kind of spoils her parade. He says, if that were so, then how could it be that your summoner feared opposition to his task? If you gaze deeply enough into his mind to see that all you say you have, then you had to have seen that also. For what other reason did he wake me from my sleep, save to serve as his weapon, though I am no man's servant? He thought he had conjured up an elemental spirit that he could force to serve his will, not knowing that he had awakened in truth what he had named in mockery. I have walked this world for a wheel of the seasons, seeking out that which was the cause of my interrupted rest, and so I can tell you, Aniran, your coming has been foretold. She doesn't think that this matters, but he goes on. I merely want to tell you that your coming has been foretold. If you mean to journey north to find wild mages garbed in robes of blue, you search in vain. Since that day, many years ago, when a certain child, whom the wild mages call the Fire Crown Boy, was brought to one of them to be healed of an illness, all wild mages have known that he was the destined champion of light. And no champion is ever born if one won't be needed against the dark. They have known since that day that you would come in his lifetime, and the elves have known of your coming for even longer. So do you still think it will be so easy to go into the north and claim that which you seek? And Niren says, of course. I can totally go. Your words are empty. You're trying to trick me. And the fire crown says, no, I don't lie. If you know anything about my race or anything about me, you know that the fire spirits do not lie. Aniran is very upset. The world of form held so many things that she and her brethren craved desperately, but it also held the one thing that they feared. In this time-bound realm, it was possible for all that they were to be unmade beyond the possibility of resurrection. Aniron, being a typical, I was going to say typical demon, but I've never met a demon, a typical fantasy trope demon, then tries to bargain with the Fire Crown. She's like, you're a great power, and you aren't really of the light and you aren't really of the dark. You are a neutral great power, and join with me, and between the two of us we can just completely rule this world. The Fire Crown is like, that's an interesting thing you're offering. But it would be a much more interesting if it were being offered to me by someone in the full bloom of her power. Maybe if you start breeding up this race of demons, then maybe I'll be a little bit more interested in your offer. She kind of throws a temper tantrum, which is something that we will see a lot from this demon, and it's the reason I said she is not as cool and calculating as Queen Sevilla, the Queen of the Undarkened, was. But then again, you have to remember that Aniron is essentially a newborn. She has not been in this world long, as opposed to Queen Sevilla, who had been around for a very long time. But she says that she's going to destroy the Fire Crown, and then she hesitates and realizes that she probably can't. And so she doesn't have a lot of choice. The Fire Crown points out that she might not be able to find a northern wild mage, but, Bisochim is still here in the desert, and Tercel and Harrier are also around, and she could probably deal with them. She contemplates that. She wonders if the Fire Crown is just kind of trying to trick her. She could still go to the north. She's pretty confident that she's going to be able to get somebody to help her, but she's not sure. I should destroy you now, she snarled, angry that no course of action seemed clear to her. If you could, I would have felt no need to warn you, for your power would already be so great that nothing could withstand it, said the Fire Crown. I have spoken nothing but truth. The elven kind count many powerful dragon-bound mages amongst their number, and they have known of your coming for many lifetimes of the kings of men. This is the truth. From the moment the Fire Crown boy sought healing, the wild mages have known that he would grow to be the champion of light. This too is truth. The wild mages of the northern lands do not go among their people openly. Instead, they work in secret, and no man may say if he encounters a wielder of the wild magic. Truth again. There are 3 here who know you for what you are, and who will serve your purpose of your magic. This is the last truth I have for you, Aniron. I offer no more gifts. She thinks about it and thinks, yeah, she could probably corrupt either Harrier or Tercel, or maybe even Bisochim again. She corrupted him once. And so she says, all right, I will stay here. And upon the day that I possess the power of a mage of this world, you, Fire Crown, will come and lay your crown at the foot of my throne. And the Fire Crown agrees. He says, upon that day I shall do all that you wish. And Aniron turns, ignoring him, walking back into the desert, thinking she would build a stronghold here. She would do her work in secret, choosing her consort, gaining his fealty, establishing her fortress, and summoning up her armies, and when everything had gone as she wished, breeding up a new race of demons to rule here. If he who called her could not be made to serve her desires, well, there were two more. And if all three of them failed her, well, then she would head to the northern lands. And that is how the chapter ends, with Aniran, who, like I said, she lacks the, I hesitate to call it sophistication, but that's the only thing I can think of to call it. She lacks the polish, I guess, of Queen Sevilla from the Obsidian trilogy, which might actually be an advantage for Tercel and Harrier, or it might not be, because Sevilla at least had patience. She was also a really detestable demon, and so is Aniran, but I feel like the impatience that we're already seeing in this demon might be an advantage for the boys, who I'm not sure that their grand plan is going to come to much. I mean, it does seem like a good plan. Try to get Tercel or Bisochim to the elves and just get help. It also seems way too simple. So that was chapter 5. I hope that you enjoyed the recap, and I will see you next time.